Hey everybody, welcome back to Bleak. This is Amanda, and I know it's dark around me. I apologize for that. I'm actually in my car. I was going to be doing some deliveries, and it's been really slow because it's Easter, and I figured might as well pull over and stop and record a video about this new development in the Justin Baldoni, Blake Lively debacle. This is something that is, to me, it's a very big deal. It completely tracks with how shady Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds are. And so to start, I want to give an overview of exactly what, kind of more in a nutshell, as concise as I can describe this new development in this sham lawsuit. And then I will go through the specifics and get into the details. Because I've been doing a lot of research and making sure I have my, I understand fully what the legal implications are of this. And if you are following this case and you have not heard about this sham lawsuit, or you just want another perspective on it, I would highly, highly recommend you listen to this video. So this is more about the audio for me than it is the visual, obviously. So I'm assuming people probably listen to this more like a podcast. So I apologize again for the darkness, but I'm just in my car and it's dark and it's raining, etc. So anyway, the overview of this new development is, well, first I want to start off, if you have watched my other videos on Blake Lively, you know that from the very beginning I have said flat out that I don't believe her. I didn't believe her in the beginning, and I've gotten into the reasons why, but then once that dance montage video came out, and to me that was objective proof that she's lying, I have really had a huge problem with her. And at this point, I don't see how, even if she came out with some really bombshell evidence, to me, I wouldn't believe it at this point, because she's had such a long time to say her position, and she's also been caught in a lot of lies. So this, I think this sham lawsuit that we're going to talk about, really, it's important because it really shows how methodical and diabolical and just intentional all of this was on the part of Blake Lively. Now, I don't think she thought it was going to get the attention that it ended up getting, but I do believe that she thought she could take out Justin Baldoni, and she had no qualms about lying or making things up or fabricating, etc. So, the overview of this fake lawsuit in a nutshell, before we get into the details, is basically Blake Lively wanted to subpoena Stephanie Jones, which was a publicist of Justin Baldoni. His publicist was a woman named Jennifer Abel, and she worked for Stephanie Jones. It's like a publicist company. And Blake Lively somehow got wind of the fact that Jennifer Abel had some text messages where they were talking about, in her mind, it was like smearing her or doing a smear campaign, which I don't believe the text messages were. I think they were taken out of context, but she believed that if she could get her hands on these text messages, that she wanted to use them for her New York Times article and for her California Civil Rights Department complaint, which is also known as a CRD complaint. So she had to figure out a way to show the New York Times that she had gotten these text messages through a subpoena, because Jennifer Abel, it was technically Stephanie Jones' phone, because it was her work company phone, but Jennifer Abel, it was her personal cell phone. And you can't just give someone, like, you're not legally obligated to give somebody your personal cell phone information without a subpoena. And the New York Times, as much as I don't really respect them after this whole thing, isn't going to publish text messages unless they know that they were gotten through legitimate legal channels. So Blake Lively needed to get those messages through a subpoena, but they didn't want to notify the Wayfarer parties and Justin Baldoni at that, like, this would have been way back in like September of 2024. The article didn't come out until like December of 2024. So they didn't want Justin Baldoni to get wind of the fact that they were, going to be doing this complaint and doing this article and everything. So Blake Lively's attorneys basically used one of Blake Lively's small companies that she doesn't really use as a way to create a fake lawsuit, and they subpoenaed Jennifer Abel's phone, which is Stephanie Jones, because that's who she was working for, in order to get those cell records. And so that they did, this is something that they actually did. So that is, in a nutshell, the overview of what they did. So I want to get more into the details of the lawsuit, the fake lawsuit itself, and what are some of the ramifications, and what does this all mean. So when Jennifer Abel was approached to give her text messages to, well, let's go back. We need to back up here a little bit, because this is all pertinent, and just bear with me. I know that this sounds convoluted, but once you understand everything, you'll be glad that you followed along here. So Stephanie Jones had her company that Jennifer Abel was working for. It was a publicist company. Jennifer Abel, who was Justin Baldoni's publicist and the Wayfarer parties, which would be like Jamie Heath and maybe even Steve Sarowitz. And Jennifer Abel decided she was going to go on her own, which is not an unusual thing to do as a publicist. It's kind of a cutthroat industry. And so she wanted to start her own company. And she wanted to take a lot of her clients with her, and apparently Justin Baldoni agreed to stay, and the Wayfarer parties agreed to stay on as her client. And of course Stephanie Jones was not happy about that. And that is really relevant here, because in my mind, I'm thinking, well, why would Stephanie Jones, who at that time technically was representing Baldoni, like, why would she want to give up those messages that make Baldoni look bad? And the answer is Jennifer Abel was going off on her own and taking Baldoni and the Wayfarer parties with her. So Stephanie Jones was not happy about that. She was kind of upset with Jennifer Abel, and she was upset with Justin Baldoni, as you can imagine. But it's not a crime to go off on your own. A lot of people do it. I'm sure Stephanie Jones is losing clients because publicists are going off on their own, and that sucks, but it is what it is. But that gives you kind of an idea of like why she might, if she's approached by Blake Lively and is like, hey, we really would like to get these text messages, you can understand why Stephanie Jones would want to comply. But Stephanie Jones can't just give Blake Lively this entire cell phone of this, it's essentially the personal cell phone of Jennifer Abel, without a subpoena, a legal subpoena saying you have to give this over by law, this cell phone. So Blake Lively's attorneys decided, okay, we need a subpoena, because normally when you file a subpoena, you have to notify the parties. So for example, they would file their lawsuit, and then they would say they file a subpoena for Jennifer Abel's phone. Justin Baldoni and the Wayfarer parties legally would get notified, like, hey, someone is trying to get your publicist's phone, or Jennifer Abel could notify them and say, like, look, they're saying they want my phone, and it has to do with your company or with Justin Baldoni. And what would end up happening is Justin Baldoni's lawyer would want to quash the subpoena. And what that essentially means is nothing happens, everything stops, like the phone doesn't get turned over until a judge looks at it and decides what is pertinent to the case. So typically what would happen is a judge would eventually look at it, and that could take time, and the judge would say, okay, well, her medical records and her conversations with her family and her pictures of her kids and etc. are not pertinent to this case, so you cannot have access to her entire phone. You're only able to have access to her communications with, these certain people, or emails with these certain people, right? And that makes sense, because people's cell phone holds a lot of very confidential information. So you can understand why you can't just get somebody's entire cell phone kind of like on a whim. But because Blake Lively's attorneys did not want to wait until a judge reviewed everything, and they wanted to get that CRD filed and get that New York Times article out, and they needed that subpoena. And again, this is back in September of 2024, so this is way before anybody was even aware that any of this was happening. So her attorneys said, okay, well, Blake Lively has this company called Van Zandt Incorporated, and it was a company that she established in 2013. It looks like she didn't really do anything with the company. As you can imagine, Blake Lively has hair care products. She has an alcohol line. Ryan Reynolds has Mint Mobile. So I'm sure they have a lot of LLCs, and I'm sure they have a lot of companies in their names. So this just happened to be some random company that she established in 2013 that she never really did anything with. So what they did is they filed a lawsuit using this Van Zandt company, and it's actually listed as being a company that belongs to Blake Reynolds, which is obviously Blake Lively, but she may legally have his last name of Reynolds. That could possibly be the case, but either way, it's obvious it's her. And they filed a lawsuit against naming just Doe defendants, right? Like Jane Doe defendants. So what that means is they're not naming any of the defendants. They just have 10 unnamed defendants listed in their lawsuit, saying, like, we are suing, Jane Doe number 1, Jane Doe number 2, not saying who these people are. Now, filing a lawsuit and using Jane Doe names isn't unusual, but the purpose of doing that would be, let's say, and I'm just totally making this up, but let's just say you are gonna sue McDonald's because you got burned with really hot coffee, and you suspect that, as an attorney, you suspect that other restaurants are also serving really obscenely hot coffee. So you're anticipating you may need to sue other people, but you don't yet know who that's going to be, right? You might learn of this at some future point. So because of that, you just list these John Doe, Jane Doe names, and then if you do end up adding a defendant to the lawsuit, you would just, let's say the CEO of Burger King is Billy Bob Burger. And so you would list Billy Bob Burger to your lawsuit, and you would have basically, that's just the legal process when you don't know who the person is at the time that you file the lawsuit. So that in and of itself is not that unusual. But typically, you would have these Jane Doe these 1 through 10 or Jane Doe 1 through 100 or whatever it is, but you would still have a notifying party, which would be McDonald's, right? Like that would be the person that you were, for sure you knew you were intending on suing, and McDonald's would be notified of the fact that you are filing this lawsuit against them. So the problem here is they list all these Jane Doe defendants, but they don't list a notifying party, which in this case would be the Wayfarer parties. Because by law, Wayfarer would have the right to know that somebody's filing a lawsuit against you and that they want, they're going to be subpoenaing all these people, right? And so what this sham lawsuit does is it gives them subpoena power to subpoena Jennifer Abel's phone, but they basically did it as a loophole so they didn't have to notify Wayfarer, so that basically Wayfarer and Justin Baldoni wouldn't know what they were up to. So technically what they did isn't illegal, but it's extremely, extremely unethical, because you do have a right to know if somebody is, going to be subpoenaing your company or people in your company, or that somebody's filing a lawsuit against you. And so it's basically kind of using loopholes to take advantage of the subpoena power and to get complete access to somebody's entire private cell phone. And lawyers I've talked to that have been in practice for like some of them 20, 30 years are like, yeah, I see John and Jane Doe defendants regularly, but I never see a notifying party like that would be like the McDonald's or the Justin Baldoni. There's always somebody there that's getting notified, because as soon as you file the lawsuit in the state of New York, you can immediately issue subpoena. In some states, there's like a waiting period of like 30 days, but in New York, which is where this was filed, you have subpoena power immediately. So the lawsuit, with this Van Zandt company is extremely vague, and it just is like basically saying these people had some kind of employment contract that they violated, and it's very vague. And so what they do is they get their subpoena, they show Jennifer Abel, they're like, and Stephanie Jones, they're like, well, we have a subpoena, she needs to hand this over. Jennifer Abel is like, okay, I guess I have to do this, right? They're showing me a legal document saying they have a subpoena for my phone. So she she hands her phone over. They do a download of the phone. They cherry pick those text messages. They leave out emojis. They leave out messages that show that there's a lot of sarcasm and joking going on. And they try to use this as proof that there's a smear campaign that was orchestrated against Blake Lively. And this is their, quote, proof. And these are the text messages that they end up putting in the CRD complaint, which again, that's the Civil Rights Department complaint, which is a requirement in California before you file a lawsuit. And they use it in the New York Times article. And then as soon as all of the article, they have what they want, the article comes out, I believe they dismissed this sham lawsuit. It was like a couple days before the New York Times article came out. So they dismiss it, and then the lawsuit goes away, and nobody's any the wiser. The problem here is I don't think they anticipated things to blow up the way that they did with the amount of publicity this case has gotten. I also don't think they thought anybody would find this. So there was a content creator that found it, and her name is, because I really want to give her proper credit. It's, I can't think of it right now. I'm really sorry. But there's someone on YouTube who, did figure this out on her own, but the Daily Mail actually had this information for at least a week or so, and for whatever reason they were sitting on it. But once this content creator figured this out, they ended up putting out an article just a few days ago. Today's Easter Sunday, to give you an idea of when this is being recorded. So they have this is basically has already come on a mainstream news article with the Daily Mail. So you may ask, okay, well, what does this mean? What does this mean for Blake Lively? What does this mean for Justin Baldoni? So my understanding is technically Blake Lively's attorneys did not do anything illegal. However, any attorney will tell you in good faith that they 100% knew what they were doing. They were trying to take advantage, sidestep the law, and they're not playing fair. They're not playing by the rules. And from what I'm told, especially a federal judge, which this is going to be a federal case because of the state, there's multiple states involved, is not going to look at this kindly. They could do a number of things to punish Blake Lively's legal team for doing this. They could sanction them with financial fines, make them pay money. They could tell Blake that she's not allowed to use these text messages in her case if this goes to trial. And that would be very detrimental for Blake Lively because that is the crux of her defamation case. They could tell her that they could throw her attorneys off the case. So Brian Friedman is, of course, just finding out about this in the last couple of days. And he came out with a statement. You can look that up. I don't remember exactly what he said about it, but he is planning on, and rightfully so, using this going forward as a way to show, look, they have been, this just, in my mind, this just further proves that Blake Lively was out to get Justin Baldoni at all costs. Whether it was true or not, whether it was mischaracterized or not, she did not care. She was out to get him from day one. And that really, to me, shows a lot of malice. That's the first thing I thought was, Baldoni has to prove this element of malice, meaning she filed these sexual harassment claims vindictively and intentionally and that they are false. And I think this, in my opinion, it kind of goes towards that. Now, so Justin Baldoni is for sure winning the court of public opinion. I believe if a jury trial was held today that he would easily win. But the problem here is there's this law in California, which is where I believe she had her CRD complaint and her lawsuit were filed in California. And she basically, there's a Me Too law that came out in 2024. So a very, very new law. And it basically protects people who claim sexual harassment. It protects them from retaliation by having the person you're accusing just send a lawsuit back at you saying, well, they're accusing me of this, so I'm going to file another lawsuit and accuse them back, or say that they're lying and just try to tie them up in all this legal mess. That's my understanding. I could be a little bit off on that, but that's how I understand it to be, is if you fight back against these allegations and you don't win, right? Like, they determine that your defense is not true. Like, if Justin Baldoni put out a defense and they said, if Blake won, whether or not I believe that Justin Baldoni's telling the truth, but let's say Blake somehow ends up winning anyway, for a multitude of reasons that could still happen, Justin Baldoni would be on the hook for every single legal fee in this entire case. And it's a law that in theory, it was meant to protect sexual harassment or sexual abuse victims, but there are some unintended consequences because the law is so new that we're kind of seeing, because the law just hasn't been used in a case like this. And so I know Justin Baldoni's attorney, Brian Friedman, is he's saying that the law, it's called 47.1, I think, that it violates his constitutional rights to defend himself. And a lot of attorneys I've talked with think that he has a shot at the very least of that possibly, the law being shown to be unconstitutional. But it is still really risky because, sometimes, most of the time, I think our legal system gets it right, but every once in a while it doesn't. And he is taking a risk, and this law just by default favors the accuser. And it's great if the accuser is telling the truth, which I do think that in the vast majority of cases that the person making the accusations usually is telling the truth. But there are cases like this one where this person is lying, and it's supposed to protect people who have limited resources and who, kind of against these bigwigs. And sadly, Blake Lively is not that person, right? She doesn't have limited resources. She is actually the more powerful entity in this whole fiasco. So anyway, that is the latest and biggest development. I hope I did not confuse you guys. I tried to explain it in a way that made sense, but it is a little bit confusing. But it sounds like at the very least there will be consequences, most likely, for Blake Lively's legal team. And on top of that, people that are following the case closely that have heard about this are really upset about it, because it's just another, when you take that dance montage scene that she lied about, thinking that there was no audio recorded, and now you have them completely playing unfair with their, basically filing a fake lawsuit in order to get somebody's personal cell phone. That's pretty horrible. I mean, they got, I believe, her entire cell phone, which included, who knows what kind of content. And if I were Jennifer Abel, I would think about, and I don't know, I could be wrong, maybe she has no grounds to sue, but it's they basically got your entire cell phone, when if they had gone through the proper channels, they likely would have only been able to see some text messages, but they wouldn't have been able to see all this other information that, and they're going to say, well, we didn't look at that, but you don't know that. They had access to all of it, and that's what the point is. So that's something I'm not sure of, but I would wonder if Jennifer Abel wanted to sue, if she would have some grounds to do that. So yeah, when people talk about shady lawyering and things that you can do as an attorney that might still be legal but are very unethical, this is a great example of that. So let me know in the comments if this is something that's making sense to you, or if I just confused you even more. I hope to get on and do some more updates soon about Lori Vallows representing herself, which that has been very interesting to watch and frustrating as well, because the jury is not allowed to know about her other convictions of unaliving her children. So that's pretty terrible. But there's a lot, and Karen Reed starts up next week, so all kinds of stuff we could talk about. Let me know if you have any suggestions, anything you want me to cover. I like to get into legal documents, so if there's anything you want me to go through, I would be happy to do that. But this is just one of those things that I think there's a lot of people covering it, so maybe you've already heard about it, but to me it seemed like a really big development, and again, right on par with Blake Lively's ethical behavior throughout this entire thing. So anyway, you guys have a great night, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.